is everything, and everything is rhetoric, but that's not the real answer. Rhetoric is the theoretical framework that enables us to interact with one another, to make relevant, effective decisions about any aspect of composition. This includes content, format, word choice, punctuation, shape, color, emphasis. So everything from the overall goal of the communication, which translates for me into what you would like the audience to think, feel, or be able to do after you've communicated with them, right down to the most minute details, the font style, the size, how many spaces after a period. All of those decisions require rhetorical perspective. Rhetoric supports that decision-making process. The other thing I like about rhetoric is that the basics, such as audience, purpose, and context, ethos, logos, and pathos, are all very easy to learn and apply, but then there's so much more. You can spend a lifetime studying rhetoric. The nuances are endlessly complex. So it's a robust framework, but it's also simple enough to use immediately.
One of the things none of my students have ever come into the classroom with is a real kind of firm understanding that writing begins with audience, purpose, and context. And I know that audience, purpose, and context is reductive. I know that in some cases it's overly reductive. But getting that basic process as part of their framework for approaching new problems is a valuable tool. It's an important tool thinking about our civic democracy, and it's a tool that students don't have when they come to college. So the importance of that process is that it's a way for them to understand how they're going to interact with the world after college. It's how the world works. It's how democracy works. It's how we come together as a society. It's how we interact on a civil level.
I include rhetoric in my writing instruction because it gives students a way to think critically about texts that's different from the way they've spent thinking critically about texts in the past. Typically in the English classroom, students can encounter literary texts and think about them in terms of a kind of literary analysis. So they think about plot, and they think about character, and all that other, and a lot of other literary kinds of things. But there are a lot of texts out there, as I've said before, that aren't what we might consider literary texts, and that kind of literary analysis doesn't necessarily apply, and I'm talking about things as if they were dualities that aren't really dualities, and I understand that, but you got to bear with me for a minute. So I think rhetoric gives us a way to think about those texts. It allows us to consider things like who is the author? By what authority does the author write about this topic? What is the writer trying to accomplish with this text? Why did this text come to be written at this particular time by this particular author for this particular audience? Who is the audience for the text? And what decisions did the writer make based on her understanding of that audience? What about the style of the text? How are the sentences structured? What words are chosen? All of those are rhetorical choices. There's something in rhetoric to explain all of that. And I think it's really helpful to give students that kind of understanding and that kind of vocabulary to talk about texts. And I think that really helps them grow as writers.
There's this essayist from the 70s, I believe, Lewis Thomas, and he made this analogy that I really like. He said that in the way that social insects, such as bees, wasps, ants, build hives, humans build language. What I especially like about that analogy is that it points to how language is absolutely essential. Language is the thing that really makes us human. I mean, what is a bee without a hive except some lump of protein? So we need language, both to form our humanity, but also for very practical reasons. The hives of social insects do very important things. It protects them. It acts like a container, a storage facility. Language does very important things for us too. Language is the place that humans go ultimately to be together. It's the place where we share. It's where we go to accomplish things for ourselves and for the greater good. So we really can't exist without language. And where there's language, there is rhetoric. Rhetoric is, in my thinking, the thing that holds that hive together. It's the thing that makes it work, if you will. It's what happens inside of that language hive. So we teach rhetoric because it's important for people to understand how in communicative acts power works fluidly to structure that hive. It's important for people to understand historically how rhetoric has been used to control and subjugate people, to dominate cultures or eradicate cultural practices. It's important for people to understand how rhetoric can and has been liberating. It's important for people, I believe, to understand not just Aristotle, but also the sophist tradition. Rhetoric can help people, and I think that that anything that can help people is worthwhile teaching. But another reason to teach rhetoric is that you just can't get away from it. If we're teaching writing, which is communication, and I mean writing in the very broad sense, then we are engaged with rhetoric. I mean, an attempt to teach writing without rhetoric, what is that? Teaching grammar? But even just teaching grammar is itself rhetorical. We cannot get away from this language hive and retain our humanity. And because we are always in among the hives, if you will, then rhetoric is there. So we are, it is incumbent upon us to teach rhetoric.
For me, process and rhetoric go hand in hand. One helps the other. So they're kind of like a symbiotic system. Process to me is a way for students to begin to explore their ideas and come to an understanding of what it is that they want to communicate to their audience. You know, so it's not necessarily that they're thinking about their audience at that stage, but it's a way of thinking about their concepts or their ideas. Okay, so they're forming those concepts through the act of writing. Writing is learning, I guess you could say. Rhetoric, on the other hand, is where students start to think about how they can effectively communicate those ideas to their audience. So they're beginning to think about who they're writing to, how they want to represent themselves, and what is the message that they want to convey? What actions do they want to give their student? What actions do they want their audience to perform after reading their text? And all of these things, I think, are integral to an effective communication. And rhetoric is the system that helps us explain that to students.